Shock is a quiet blade. On the night the birthday candles burned brightest, a mother vanished from the table and left a bill, a silence, and a family that finally had to hear the truth they had trained themselves never to listen to. Your mother disappeared. Who is going to pay the check? Lauren's voice split the restaurant like a plate shattering on tile. Heads tilted. Forks froze midair. 20 guests, all luminous under crystal light, turned toward the end of the long white table toward me just as I rose, slipped my purse over my shoulder, and said I was going to the restroom. I did not go to the restroom. I walked past the mirrored hallway, past the framed reviews and the gold-lettered vintages, and pushed through the door that led to the night. The wind outside was cool and indifferent. I felt it on my face like a benediction. Behind me, laughter broke apart into questions. Glasses clinked, then stilled. Somewhere near the head of the table, my son Robert stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. I could hear the brittle pitch of embarrassment traveling from group to group like a roomer wearing heels. On the white cloth lay the check. $300, itemized cruelty, an arithmetic of indulgence. I had not ordered much, but that was never the point. My son always assumed I would smooth the edges, sign the line, carry the weight. For years, I had done exactly that. The taxi slid to the curb. I opened the door and climbed in. "Home, please," I said, and when the driver asked for an address, I gave it in a tone I had not heard from my own mouth since I was a young woman who believed decisions were possible. As the city lights scrolled backward, I looked through the rear window at the restaurant's glow, a hive of noise and expectation, and felt a small, bright space open in my chest. It was not joy. It was not victory. It was oxygen. At home, I did not turn on the big lights. I moved through the rooms I had paid for with years, with restraint, with the long arithmetic of a widow's discipline. I took out 3 suitcases and set them by my favorite armchair. I gathered the folder I had prepared the documents, the copies, the receipts, the things that proved that a life and a house have names and keys, and placed it on the coffee table. Then I sat and waited, the small lamp in the corner drawing a warm circle on the carpet, a lighthouse for the storm I knew was coming. People think rebellion is loud. Sometimes rebellion is the sound of a woman making tea at 10:30 at night and leaving the cup untouched because her hands are steady and she refuses to spill. I heard my phone vibrate and then ring and then bleed into a steady tremor of messages. I put it face down, silent, like you set a restless child to sleep. I breathed. I remembered. I leaned back into an old chair that had held me through every other decision I ever postponed, and I allowed myself to know what I had done. I had stepped out of a role and back into a self. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the front door key jerked in the lock. Quick steps, angry breathing, the clatter of certainty falling apart. "Mom?" Robert's voice carried the scrape of panic, as if humiliation had sandpapered it raw. Behind him, Lauren's heels struck the wood in impatient little verdicts. They groped for the wall switch, flooded the room with light, and then froze. There I was, not hiding, not contrite, seated in my chair with my 3 suitcases lined like witnesses and the document folder on the table as if it too had something to say. The scene felt composed, almost theatrical, but nothing about it was performance. It was simply the first arrangement in years in which I wasn't placed at the edge of my own story. "What is this?" Robert asked, but the question did not belong to curiosity. It belonged to fear. His eyes leapt from the suitcases to my face, searching for the soft places he used to press. "Do you have any idea what you did to us? Do you know the humiliation?" Lauren said, mascara smudged, her perfection wilted at the edges. "We had to borrow. People saw. People talked. The word people meant witnesses, and witnesses meant shame, and shame, to them, had always been a debt I would hurry to pay. I did not rise. I did not apologize. I spoke in a voice that surprised even me with how even it was. "Sit," I said. "Both of you." They did not sit, but they stopped moving. Sometimes stillness is obedience enough. The restaurant had been a ceremony of their choosing. A long table, a red dress, a list of guests curated like a collection. My absence had torn a neat visible hole in their evening, and through it, all the unspoken years had begun to show. But the restaurant was only the spark. The tinder had been laid a long time before the first desperate Sunday call for $500, the air conditioner repair, the birthday that required a subsidy, the anniversary trip to Miami paid for by a pensioner who spent that week alone with dizziness and no phone call, the weekend invasion of my small house with their laughter and their sense of entitlement, the night I heard the sentence that turned love into strategy. "We need to be more strategic. She is going to catch on." Catch on to what? That my role in their lives had narrowed to finance, logistics, and silence. That my warmth had been mortgaged to their convenience. That my name had been downgraded from mother to Audrey, as if friendship without respect could be an adequate disguise for diminished affection. In the bright restaurant, amid the clatter and toast, the math became simple enough for even my exhausted heart to compute. I was paying to remain invisible. "I am leaving," I said. The words did not tremble. They were small stones laid in a path that already existed, one I had been building in the quiet with careful hands. "Leaving where?" Robert asked, as if geography could be a defense against dignity. "Away," I said, "to live the days I have left without begging for my own worth." Lauren scoffed, but the sound did not land. Her contempt had always relied on my willingness to pick it up. I did not. Robert's face changed rage, shrank into calculation, and calculation failed to find purchase. He looked past me and saw the suitcases again. He saw that I had not left the restaurant in a tantrum. I had left the life they had constructed around me in a plan. I watched the realization build in him the way thunderheads mount along a cold horizon. He wanted me to be dramatic, unstable, easily dismissed. Instead, he was confronted with a meticulous rebellion, documents aligned, clothing folded, keys ready. Men who have taken their mothers for granted struggle most when they discover she can do arithmetic without them. The clock on the wall ticked into the deep hour between night and morning, that thin frontier where habits die and new names arrive. In that silence, I remembered the shape of my son's hand when it was small enough to disappear in mine. I remembered the apartment when it still smelled of crayons and promise. I remembered the way grief had taught me thrift after his father died, how I had saved and saved and saved until saving became a synonym for love. None of those memories argued with what I had just done. They simply stood beside me like gentle witnesses who refused to testify against me. "Tomorrow," I said, "everything will be explained." My voice stayed low, almost tender. I was not trying to wound. I was trying to survive. Robert opened his mouth, then closed it. Lauren's eyes traveled again to the folder as if paper could be accused of treason. Somewhere outside, a late bus sighed at a stoplight, the city performing its usual insomnia. Inside, the lamp made a halo on the coffee table where my old life lay sorted into facts that could no longer be gaslit back into fiction. There is a moment in every story when the staircase you have climbed all your life becomes a cliff edge, and the next step is not up but away. I had reached that moment in a room I had dusted for decades, under a clock I had wound, with people I had loved past reason. I was not brave and I was not cruel. I was simply done. I looked at my son and finally let him see the border he could no longer cross. "Sit," I repeated, softer. "Because there is something you do not know about this house, and by the time the sun comes up, you will understand why I walked away from that table and did not look back." Every story of rebellion begins with something small, a favor, a phone call, a harmless request that sounds like love but tastes like surrender. Mine began 2 years before that night at the restaurant, with a voice I loved more than reason itself. "Mom, I need to ask you a huge favor." The tone was familiar, the same tone Robert used as a teenager whenever he had failed a test or dented the car. But now he was 35, a grown man with a career, a wife, and every reason not to sound like a child. I remember the sunlight spilling through the kitchen window that Sunday afternoon, the hum of the old refrigerator, the smell of coffee gone cold. I held the phone to my ear and felt my chest tighten. "What happened, son? Are you and Lauren all right?" Yes, everyone's fine," he said, and my heart, which had leapt to panic, eased slightly. "It's just that we had an unexpected expense with Lauren's car. We're a little short this month. Could you lend us $500? We'll pay you back next month, no fail." $500. My pension was $800 a month. That sum meant cutting corners on groceries, skipping medicine, postponing the electricity bill. But mothers do the arithmetic of sacrifice faster than breath. "Of course, Robert. I'll transfer it tomorrow." "You're the best mom in the world," he said, and I heard the relief in his voice. Relief not for me, but for himself. He never paid me back. The next month, it was $300 for an air conditioner repair, then $200 for Lauren's birthday celebration, then more for a business gift, an anniversary, new furniture that no longer matched the decor. In 6 months, I had given more than $3,000, almost half a year of my pension. Each time I mentioned repayment, Robert's face filled with injured disappointment. "Mom, I thought you did it because you loved us, not because you expected something in return." That line pierced me. I felt suddenly like a merchant in the wrong marketplace, trading affection for guilt. Love, he implied, was measured by how easily I erased myself. So I stopped mentioning the money, and they stopped pretending they would ever repay it. Before, Robert came on Sundays for coffee, sometimes bringing pastries. He would sit at the small kitchen table and ask about my week. It wasn't grand, but it was connection. After the loans began, the visits turned into transactions. He came only when he needed something. Lauren came even less. When she did, she stayed glued to her phone, her fingers tapping like insects on glass. One Friday afternoon, they arrived unannounced. "Hi, Mom, we brought Chinese food." Robert called as he unlocked my door with his copy of the key, the one I had given him for emergencies, not convenience. I was preparing chicken broth, simple and warm. "Son, I was just cooking," I said. "You shouldn't have. Don't worry, we're starving." They unpacked the takeout, set my plates on the table, and ate as though it were their home. I smiled, tried to talk. "How was work?" "Fine." "Lauren, how's your project?" "Fine." The conversation died between us like a candle drowning in wax. Then came that tone again, disguised as casual conversation. "Mom, Lauren and I are thinking of taking a trip for our anniversary. 3 years married, you know. We found an all-inclusive package to Miami. It's this month, but we're a little short." "How much?" I asked, already knowing I would regret it. 2,000. 2,000, nearly 3 months of my pension. I tried to breathe through the ache in my chest. "Robert, I don't have that amount available right now." For the first time that evening, Lauren looked up from her phone. Her voice was soft but cold, precise like glass. "You don't have savings?" "I have some, but for emergencies. And what is more important than your son's happiness?" she said. "Robert works so hard. He deserves a vacation. We'd do the same for our parents." The way she said my name, Audrey, not Mom, not Mrs. Rivers, stripped away the last veil of respect. I heard Robert exhale beside her, confident now that I would cave. "Let me see what I can do," I said, because mothers are trained to mend. They left half an hour later, taking the rest of the wine and leaving the dirty dishes. I sat there staring at the leftovers, at the wreckage of the dinner I hadn't even wanted. My reflection in the window looked ghostly, half erased by the city's lights. That night, I cried not from sadness, but from the terrifying realization that I had become invisible, a resource disguised as a person. I told myself it was normal, that adult children struggle and parents help. That's what love looks like in modern families: practical, transactional, inevitable. I transferred the money 2 days later. They spent a week in Miami. During those 7 days, I received 3 messages. The first, "We've taken off, Mom." The second, a picture of the beach. "This is incredible." The third, "We're coming back tomorrow. We love you." 3 sentences purchased with 2 years of savings. They never called. They didn't ask if I was eating or if I needed anything. That week, my blood pressure spiked. I could barely stand, dizziness spinning the room like a cruel carousel. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Carroll, who took me to the doctor. She barely knew me. She owed me nothing. "Audrey," she said, "can't your son come with you?" "He's traveling," I whispered. "I don't want to worry him." Carol's silence was sharper than any words. When Robert and Lauren returned, 2 weeks passed before they came to see me. They arrived on a Saturday afternoon, tanned and relaxed, dragging suitcases behind them. "Mom, we came to stay for the weekend," Robert said. "They're fumigating our building. The smell's unbearable." He didn't ask. He announced. Lauren brushed past me toward the bathroom, her makeup bag clutched like a flag of conquest. I stood there in my own doorway, smiling the way tired women smile when they are too exhausted to fight. "Of course, son. My house is your house." They ate my food, watched my television, and slept in my guest room without thanks. I cooked the last of my good chicken, arranged the table nicely, hoping the gesture would remind them of the warmth we once had. They barely looked up from their phones. When I mentioned that I had been ill, Robert said, "Good that you're better, Mom. This pasta's a little dry." Something cracked inside me then, not loudly, but with the soft precision of a bone finally giving way. That night, I heard them talking in the next room. Lauren's whisper floated through the thin wall. "No, Robert, we've asked her for too much. Give her time." And then Robert's reply, low and certain, "She's my mom. That's what mothers are for." The air left my lungs. My son's voice, once a lullaby, now sounded like a verdict. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, realizing I had raised a man who thought love meant access. But that realization was only the beginning. Because what happened next, the request that would finally expose everything, would turn my quiet despair into the storm that would swallow us all. The following week, the phone calls began again, cheerful, polite, rehearsed. "Hi, Mom, how are you?" The warmth was artificial, like sunlight from a fluorescent bulb. I could tell immediately that behind each call was a new request. And I was right. We found an incredible apartment, Mom. Bigger, brighter, a better neighborhood. The only problem is the deposit. They're asking for 2 months up front, and we only have 1. His voice was casual, but there was tension under it, a strain that told me he already assumed my answer would be yes. We would need 1,200 more. I felt my pulse slow, not from calmness but from exhaustion. Robert, I don't have any more savings. I gave you everything I had for the trip. Silence. Then the sound of irritation disguised as concern. But Mom, you have a credit card, don't you? Maybe an advance on your pension? He said it as if it were logical, as if a woman of 68 with $800 a month could take a loan to finance his dream apartment. I can't do that, I said. I'm already tight as it is. Robert sighed, the kind of sigh that drips with disappointment. Mom, you live alone. You don't have big expenses. What do you spend your money on? I stared at the phone in disbelief. On food, Robert, on medicine, on this house, which you use whenever you like. He said nothing for a moment. Then, the sentence that would echo in my head for weeks. Okay, but remember, at some point you'll get older and need us to take care of you. This is like an investment in our future. The manipulation was almost elegant in its cruelty, a transaction disguised as love. I felt my throat tighten. I didn't argue. I only said, let me think about it. His tone changed instantly, lighter, relieved. Great, but please decide fast. The apartment won't last long on the market. After he hung up, the silence in my house grew enormous. It filled every corner like fog. I walked through the rooms, touching the furniture, the walls, the framed photographs that once meant family. I stopped in front of one picture, Robert at 10 years old, his arm around my neck, both of us laughing. That photo felt like a relic from another universe. I whispered to it, when did you stop seeing me as your mother? The days that followed were long and heavy. My phone rang 3 times that week. Each call began the same way, polite greetings, then the question. Mom, have you thought about it yet? I always gave the same answer. I can't, Robert. I have no way. The pauses after my refusals were filled with quiet resentment. He didn't argue, didn't plead. He simply hung up. And then the calls stopped. Not one message. Not a single word. My days became gray. Every time the phone buzzed, I hoped it was him. It was never him. Only bank advertisements, telemarketers, reminders for bills. The loneliness began to feel physical, like cold metal pressed against my skin. I realized that in a strange way, their requests had been my only link to them. When the demands stopped, even the illusion of connection disappeared. One afternoon, Carol knocked on my door with 2 cups of coffee. She had noticed the lights off too early, the mail piling up in my box. She sat with me on the couch, her presence steady and kind. Audrey, she said softly, you've looked tired lately. Has your son been visiting? I smiled weakly. He's busy, with work and everything. She nodded, but her eyes didn't believe me. You know, my kids call me every day, even if it's just for 5 minutes. They want to make sure I'm okay. You deserve that too. I wanted to defend Robert, to say he worked hard, that times were different, that young people lived faster now. But the words stuck in my throat, because deep down, I knew Carol was right. He's not a bad boy, I whispered. He just forgets. She took my hand. Audrey, children who truly love you don't forget. They don't call only when they need something. Her tone wasn't cruel. It was pity mixed with truth. That night, her words echoed in my mind like distant thunder. I looked around my living room, the one I kept clean for visits that never came, and wondered if I had mistaken silence for peace all these years. I told myself again that Robert would come around, that he was under pressure, that Lauren would change. But a part of me already knew the truth. Love that depends on what you can give is not love. It's dependency wearing a mask. Still, I clung to hope. I told myself things would improve once they settled in their new apartment. I didn't yet understand that I was no longer part of their future, only part of their financial plan. The following morning, I woke with a decision forming quietly inside me. Fragile but real. I would start saying no. I didn't yet know how, or when, or what it would cost me. But I knew that the next time they called asking for more, my answer would not be silence. And when the phone finally rang again and I saw Robert's name flashing on the screen, I could already feel the weight of that single word waiting in my chest, ready to change everything. When I answered that call, Robert's voice sounded lighter than before, falsely cheerful, like someone rehearsing charm. Hey, Mom, how are you? We finally moved into the new apartment. You should see it, it's amazing. His tone carried pride, the kind that expects applause. I smiled out of habit, though he couldn't see it. I'm glad, son. I hope you'll both be happy there, he continued, describing the neighborhood, the pool, the gym, the new furniture they'd ordered. I listened quietly, my eyes on the unpaid medical bill on the counter. I was still calculating whether I could afford next month's medicine, but he never asked. We'd love for you to visit, he said finally. Once we get everything set up. I knew that visit would never come, not unless they needed something. For a few weeks, the silence returned. No messages, no visits. I used that quiet to breathe, to find a rhythm that was mine. I cooked smaller portions, read old books, went for walks with Carol in the park. The routine was peaceful, even if the peace felt borrowed. But peace never lasts long when guilt and habit live in the same house. One Friday afternoon, I was sitting in the living room when the doorbell rang. It was Robert and Lauren again. I almost didn't recognize them, tanned, glowing, full of that effortless arrogance that money, or at least borrowed money, gives. Mom, we brought groceries, Robert said, smiling as if generosity erased everything. Behind him, Lauren added, We thought we'd spend the weekend. It's been so long. They came in without waiting for an answer. The smell of perfume followed them through the hall. Bags hit the counter. Lauren slipped off her shoes, kicked them aside, and collapsed on the couch like she owned it. I stood there, trying to understand whether I was happy to see them or afraid of what new favor might follow. That night, over dinner, Robert talked endlessly about the new apartment, the color of the curtains, the view from the balcony, the amazing kitchen Lauren had barely touched. They spoke in circles, laughing together. I asked questions, mostly to feel included, but my words floated through the air and vanished before reaching them. I was an echo in my own home. When I brought up my recent doctor's visit, Robert barely looked up. Good that you're better, Mom. By the way, do you have more sauce? Lauren sighed dramatically. Audrey, do you have dessert? At the hotel in Miami, we had an entire dessert buffet every night. No, I said quietly. No dessert. Oh, what a shame. She pushed her plate away, half-eaten, and went to the couch. Robert followed her a few minutes later. They turned on a movie. I stayed at the table, surrounded by cold plates and empty glasses. When the laughter from the television filled the room, something inside me broke in silence. I washed the dishes slowly, deliberately. Each movement felt like punctuation to a sentence I had been writing for years, a sentence that ended with no one listening. Later, I lay in bed, wide awake, listening to their muffled voices through the wall. Lauren's whisper slipped through the air. No, Robert, we've asked her for too much this year. Give her time. His answer came sharp and tired. She's my mom. That's what mothers are for. Those 6 words struck deeper than any insult. That's what mothers are for, to be used, to be guilted, to be the emergency fund disguised as affection. I turned my face to the wall, tears slipping quietly into the pillow. It wasn't the first time I cried like that, but it was the first time the tears felt clean, like washing something off rather than drowning in it. The next morning I made breakfast, fresh orange juice, scrambled eggs, toast. The table looked cheerful, almost festive. I thought maybe I could reclaim a small piece of normal. Robert came down yawning. Smells good, he said. Lauren followed, immaculate as always. She took a sip of coffee, frowned. Audrey, is this instant coffee? Yes. It's what I always drink. Oh, I only drink ground coffee. Instant bothers my stomach. Don't you have another kind? No, Lauren. This is all there is. She sighed as if I had failed an invisible test. What a shame. She didn't drink it. Robert ate quietly. No one thanked me. When he finished, he folded his napkin and looked at me with that expression I had learned to dread, the prelude to a favor. Mom, I know we've already asked you for a lot this year, but something came up. We found a new apartment, bigger, nicer, and they require 2 months' deposit. We only have 1. Could you help us out with $1,200? I felt the room tilt. Robert, I already told you. I have nothing left. You could get a loan, he said calmly, as if it were simple. It's not that hard. I can't. I'm retired. I don't qualify. His eyes hardened. I just don't understand. You live alone. You don't travel. You don't have expenses. What do you spend your money on? On staying alive, I said. The words came out colder than I intended. Robert leaned back, sighing. Okay, I was just asking. But you know families help each other. One day you'll need us. I nodded slowly. Yes, one day. But inside, A truth had already started to take shape, a truth sharp enough to cut through guilt. Families help each other, yes. But what happens when help becomes servitude? When love becomes a currency that never stops devaluing? That afternoon, when they finally left, I stood by the window watching their car drive away. The house fell quiet again, the same quiet as before, but this time it felt different. It didn't feel like loneliness anymore. It felt like warning. Because deep down, I already knew something was changing. Something irreversible. And the next time I saw them, the woman they knew as their convenient mother would no longer exist. The change came quietly, like a tide creeping in while you are still standing on dry sand, thinking you are safe. For weeks after that last visit, I didn't hear from Robert or Lauren. The silence, once painful, became strangely comforting. My days began to follow their own rhythm again: morning tea, watering the plants, a short walk to the market, an evening chat with Carol on her porch. I began to feel the faint outline of something I hadn't felt in years: control. Then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed. "Mom, we're celebrating Lauren's birthday next Saturday. Martino's restaurant, 8 o'clock sharp. Confirm if you can come." There was no warmth in the message, no question mark. It was not an invitation. It was a notice. I stared at the screen for a long time. Martino's one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. I knew the place. I knew the prices. I also knew this was not about family. It was about appearance. Still, I said yes. Maybe, I told myself, this dinner would be different. Maybe I would feel included again, seen again. That faint, foolish hope that mothers never quite kill whispered in me. 2 days later, Lauren called. "Audrey, did you buy my gift yet?" I hesitated. "Not yet, dear. Is there something you'd like?" Her voice brightened. "I have a wish list at the department store. I'll send you the link. The things I like are between $200 and $300, but there are cheaper options too." "Cheaper options?" I almost laughed. "I'll see what I can do," I said. "Perfect," she replied, then added casually. "And since it's going to be a big dinner, about 20 people, Robert and I are covering our part, but it would be nice if you, as the mother-in-law, could help with drinks or desserts." Her tone was sugar-coated, but the message was pure order. "Lauren, I don't know if I can—" "Oh, come on, Audrey, it's my birthday. I'm only turning 30 once." She ended the call before I could answer. I sat there with the phone still in my hand, staring at nothing. A heavy, familiar feeling rose in my chest, the combination of guilt and anger that had followed me for years. But this time, the anger was sharper. I realized I was being cast in a play. I no longer believed in the dutiful, generous mother-in-law who buys gifts she can't afford to earn respect she never receives. The next morning, I went to the department store. The glass doors slid open with a hiss, and I stepped into a world of polished marble and perfume that didn't belong to me. I found the computer screen listing Lauren's wish list. The cheapest item was $180, a set of towels. Towels. The others, perfume, handbags, shoes, cost more than my monthly grocery bill. I stood there for several minutes, my reflection flickering on the screen. I felt small, almost invisible, like a ghost haunting the luxury of others. In the end, I bought the towels. The cashier wrapped them in elegant paper and tied a golden bow. "A special gift?" she asked. "For my daughter-in-law's birthday," I replied. "How lovely," she smiled. "She's lucky to have you." I smiled back, but it wasn't joy that filled me. It was the bitter taste of irony. Saturday arrived. I wore my best dress, the one I kept for special occasions. I did my hair, added a touch of lipstick, and stood in front of the mirror for a long time. I looked like a woman ready for a celebration, but inside I felt like someone attending her own goodbye. Martino's glowed with chandeliers and white linens, the kind of place where waiters moved like dancers and laughter cost $40 a plate. I told the hostess I was with Lauren's party, and she led me to the back where a long table stretched under crystal light. I saw Robert first laughing, glass in hand, surrounded by men in suits. Lauren sat at the other end, radiant in a red dress, her smile bright enough to blind anyone who didn't know her. I stood beside the table, waiting for someone to notice me. A minute passed, then another. Finally, Robert looked up. "Oh, Mom, you made it. Sit wherever you find space." He didn't stand. He didn't introduce me. He turned back to his friends. I found a seat near the end of the table beside strangers who barely glanced my way. I placed the gift box on my lap, my hands folded over it like it was armor. The waiter approached. "Would you like something to drink?" "Just water," I said. "Are you sure, ma'am? We have excellent wine." "Water is fine." The dinner began. Dishes arrived, Lobster, steak, things I couldn't pronounce. The conversations swirled around me, loud and careless. They spoke of trips, stocks, new cars. I nodded occasionally, pretending to belong. But in truth, I was invisible again, a ghost sitting politely among the living. When the cake arrived, Lauren stood and gave a speech about how wonderful her year had been, her husband, her friends, her life. To love, to success, and to many more years of happiness, she said, raising her glass. Everyone toasted. I raised my glass of water. No one noticed. Then came the gifts. Perfume, jewelry, designer handbags. Applause followed each one. When my turn came, I offered my box with a small smile. Happy birthday, Lauren. She opened it, glanced inside, and smiled without warmth. Oh, how nice. Thanks, Audrey. The box was set aside like something forgettable. $180, discarded in 2 seconds. When the waiter finally placed the check on the table, a hush fell. Robert lifted it, scanned the numbers, and frowned. Then he leaned toward Lauren, whispering. She nodded. He looked at me. Mom, could you come here for a second? I walked over. The total is about $450, he said quietly. We're covering $300. Could you take care of the rest? You know, as your contribution to Lauren's birthday. $150, nearly half my monthly expenses. Robert, I don't have that much cash. Use your card, he said quickly. We'll sort it out later. Sort it out later. I knew what that meant. I would never see that money again. I don't think I can, I began, but Lauren cut me off. Audrey, it's my birthday. Are you really going to ruin my night over money? The words hit like a slap. Around us, conversations began to fade. People were watching. Robert's eyes filled with embarrassment and pleading. Mom, please don't make a scene. For a moment, I saw myself through their eyes, the quiet, obedient mother, the one who always paid, who never fought back. And I realized that I was done playing that part. I'm going to the restroom, I said. I picked up my purse and walked away. The hallway was dim, the music fading behind me. I passed the restrooms and saw the door to the parking lot. Without hesitation, I pushed it open. The cool night air hit my face like a second chance. I called a taxi. 5 minutes, the operator said. I waited in the dark, hidden behind a parked car, my heart pounding but steady. I expected to hear Robert calling my name. I didn't. The taxi arrived. I got in, gave my address, and watched Martino's lights shrink in the distance. For the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped by guilt. I felt something entirely new, freedom. When I reached home that night, the house was quiet, heavy with the stillness of everything I had ever endured. I turned on a single lamp and stood for a long moment at the door, listening to my own breath. Then I walked straight to my bedroom, pulled the suitcases from the closet, and laid them open on the bed. I began to fold my clothes slowly, one shirt after another, each fold a sentence in a language of goodbye. It wasn't rage that moved my hands, it was clarity. I packed carefully. My clothes, my medicines, my few pieces of jewelry, the photo albums of my husband and my son as a boy. Then I opened the small safe I had hidden behind the shelf. Inside lay $1,200 money I had secretly saved over a year, 20 here, 30 there, scraps of independence I had managed to hide from everyone. Tonight, that money was my escape. I took the brown folder from the desk drawer, the one that contained all my papers, passport, pension records, and property documents. I placed it neatly on the coffee table in the living room. The house felt like a witness now, watching me reclaim what was left of myself. The phone began to ring. I let it vibrate against the wood, again and again, until the ringing became part of the silence. When it stopped, messages began to flood in. Mom, where are you? What are you doing? You embarrassed us in front of everyone. You have to come back right now. Each message was soaked in anger, not concern. I put the phone face down and continued packing. By 10:30, I was ready. 3 suitcases stood near the armchair, zipped and aligned like soldiers at attention. I changed into a simple outfit, soft pants, flat shoes, a plain blouse. I removed my earrings, wiped off my lipstick, and let my hair fall loose. The mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized, calm, steady, almost unrecognizable in her peace. I sat in my chair, turned on the small lamp, and waited. The waiting felt inevitable, like the pause between thunder and rain. At 12:30, I heard the car outside. Doors slammed, heels struck the pavement, keys rattled violently at the lock. The door burst open. Robert's voice filled the hallway, sharp and furious. Mom, where are you? Lauren followed, her voice tighter, higher. Do you know what you've done? You ruined everything." They entered the living room and froze. The lamp threw a golden circle across the carpet. I sat in the middle of it, my suitcase beside me, the folder on the table. I looked up slowly, meeting their eyes. Robert's face shifted from anger to disbelief. Lauren's expression was smeared with mascara and rage. "What is this?" Robert demanded. "What's going on? I'm leaving," I said quietly. "Leaving where?" His voice cracked between anger and fear. "Far away. Somewhere I can start over." He let out a nervous laugh. "Mom, that's ridiculous. You can't just walk away from your life. You don't even have money." "I have enough," I said. "Enough to live with dignity." Lauren crossed her arms. "Dignity? You humiliated us in front of 20 people. We had to borrow from friends to pay the bill. They'll never respect us again. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" I looked at her, not unkindly, but without apology. "Now you know." Robert took a step forward, his voice breaking. "Mom, I know we sometimes ask for help. I know we mess up, but that doesn't give you the right to do something this cruel. You've always been dramatic, but this is too much." "Cruel?" I repeated softly. "Cruel is pretending love is only real when I pay for it. Cruel is taking without gratitude. Cruel is using me like a spare wallet." He froze, words dying in his throat. I pointed to the folder on the table. "You should look at those papers, Robert." He hesitated, then picked it up. As his eyes moved down the page, the color drained from his face. "You sold the house?" "Yes," I said. 3 weeks ago." His voice cracked. "For how much?" $120,000. Lauren gasped. "You can't be serious. That house is Robert's inheritance." "No," I said, my tone steady. "That house was mine. I paid for it with your father's insurance when he died. It was my home for 38 years. I decided what to do with it." Robert slumped onto the sofa, clutching the papers. "You sold everything, without even telling me?" "Yes," I said. "I paid my debts, cleared my medical bills, and saved enough to live on. The rest, $50,000, I donated." Lauren's eyes widened. "You donated it? To who?" "To a shelter for older women who've been victims of family abuse," I said. "Because that's what I am, Robert. Not a victim of violence, but of neglect, of manipulation, of being loved only for what I could provide." Lauren laughed, a sharp, nervous laugh. "That's ridiculous. You've never been abused. We just asked for help like any family would." "Help?" I said. "You never asked, you demanded. And when I hesitated, you made me feel like a monster for saying no." Robert lifted his head, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. "Mom, if you needed money back, you should have just told us. We would have found a way." "I did tell you, Robert, many times. And every time, you turned it into guilt. You told me I was selfish for keeping score." He ran his hands through his hair, shaking his head. "You're right about one thing, you spoiled us. You never said no, and now you're blaming us for it." His words stung because they carried a grain of truth. I had allowed this. I had mistaken silence for kindness, generosity for love, but that truth didn't absolve him. "Yes," I said. "I spoiled you. I made it too easy, but now I'm ending it." Lauren stepped forward, her voice trembling with fury. "You're going to regret this, Audrey. You'll be alone. Completely alone. No family, no one to take care of you when you get sick. And then what?" I looked at her calmly. "Then I'll still have peace, because peace is worth more than company that feeds on you." Robert stood suddenly, eyes blazing. "You're selfish. You're throwing your family away." I rose slowly from the chair, meeting his height. "Family isn't what you take from. Family is what you nurture. And what you've built isn't family. It's dependence dressed as love." The silence that followed was heavy, final. Lauren's lip trembled. Robert's shoulders sagged. I could see them realizing, perhaps for the first time, that I was not going to change my mind. I picked up my purse. "Return the keys, please." Robert hesitated, then yanked them from his pocket and tossed them onto the table. "Fine. But you'll regret this, Mom. You'll miss us. And when you do, we won't be there." "I know," I said. "And that's all right." The door slammed behind them, the sound echoing through the house like a verdict. I stood there for a long time, staring at the space they'd left, feeling the air settle back into its natural rhythm. For the first time in decades, the silence didn't feel empty, it felt earned. But as the night deepened and the clock ticked past 2, a thought began to whisper at the edge of my mind, a question I couldn't yet answer. I had finally said no. But where does a woman go when saying no costs her everything she has ever known? Morning came with a light too calm for what had happened hours earlier. I hadn't slept. I sat by the window watching the city wake up, the streets filling with strangers who had no idea that inside this small apartment, a life had just been dismantled. My suitcases waited beside the door, silent proof that I meant what I said. The air smelled like freedom and loss at the same time. At 8, Carol knocked softly. Her eyes widened when she saw the bags. "Audrey," she said carefully. "What happened?" I poured her coffee, my hands steady. "I'm leaving," I said. "For good this time." She stared at me, then at the room, then back at me. "Leaving where?" I smiled faintly. "Anywhere that isn't here." We sat at the table like two survivors after a storm. Carol didn't ask for details at first. She just reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Finally, she said, "I always hoped you'd realize you deserved better, but I never thought you'd actually do it." I laughed softly. Neither did I. She offered me a place at her cousin's house by the sea, a quiet coastal town 3 hours away. "You could stay there until you decide what's next," she said. "There's a spare room, and they'd love to have someone to talk to." I hesitated, then nodded. "The sea sounds nice," I whispered. We loaded my bags into her car that afternoon. As I locked the door one last time, I didn't feel sorrow. I felt light. The hallway that had once carried my son's footsteps now echoed with something different, my own. The elevator doors closed, and with them, 38 years of motherhood built around sacrifice. The road stretched out like a promise. Carol drove while I watched the city dissolve behind us. For the first time in years, I didn't think about Robert or Lauren. I thought about myself, what music I liked, what food I craved, what kind of mornings I wanted. They were small questions, but they felt revolutionary. By the time we reached the coast, the sun was setting. The town smelled of salt and pine. Carol's cousin, Margaret, greeted me with open arms. "Any friend of Carol's is family here," she said warmly. Her home was small, but alive, curtains fluttering in the breeze, a kettle whistling softly, the sound of the sea just beyond the porch. That first night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the waves. They sounded patient, eternal, like they had been waiting for me to arrive. For years I had been surrounded by noise phones ringing, demands, arguments disguised as love. Now the silence was gentle, not heavy. I realized peace has its own sound. The next morning, I walked to the shore. The sand was cool under my feet. Seagulls circled above, indifferent and free. I stood there for a long time, watching the horizon blur into sky. The ocean didn't care who I was, what I'd given, or what I'd lost. It accepted everything without judgment. I breathed deeply, and for the first time, the air didn't hurt. I began helping Margaret in her bookstore, a small, quiet place filled with the smell of paper and dust. Customers came in, smiled, talked about books, then left. No one asked me for money. No one reminded me of debt. I earned a little every week, enough for groceries and tea. It wasn't wealth, but it was dignity, and dignity, I learned, is its own form of luxury. Every evening, Carol visited. We sat on the porch, drinking tea, watching the sea swallow the Sunday. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes we didn't. The silence no longer frightened me. It felt earned, deserved. One night, she said softly, "Do you miss him?" I thought for a long time before answering. "I miss who I thought he was," I said. "But that version of him doesn't exist anymore." Days turned into weeks. My skin grew warm from the sun. My laugh came easier. I learned the rhythm of waves, the sound of freedom measured in tide and wind. Yet sometimes, late at night, I caught myself glancing at my phone, wondering if he would ever call. Not to ask, just to say, "I'm sorry." The screen always stayed dark. Still, I didn't feel empty. I felt awake. For the first time in my life, I had no one to take care of but myself, and that realization was both terrifying and beautiful. But one afternoon, as I stacked books on a shelf, my phone began to buzz. A number I knew by heart appeared on the screen. Robert. I froze. My hands trembled slightly. I hadn't heard from him in almost 2 months. The sound of that name pulled the air out of the room. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then, with a deep breath, I answered. "Mom," he said quietly. His voice was softer than I remembered. "Please, don't hang up." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt heavier than all the years of noise that came before. I could hear the ocean through the open window, its calm rhythm mocking the tremor in my chest. "I'm listening," I said finally. Robert exhaled, a sound more like surrender than relief. I didn't know where you went. We looked everywhere. Lawrence said you'd lost your mind, that you ran off out of spite, but I knew it wasn't that. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked. Mom, I just need to see you. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to protect the fragile peace I'd built, but a mother's heart is an old door it remembers how to open, even after being slammed too many times. Why now? I asked. It's been weeks. You had plenty of time before. There was a rustle on the other end. Because everything fell apart, he said quietly. We lost the apartment. Lauren's been staying with her parents. I'm trying to find work, but it's been rough. I need help. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Help. It was always that word. I felt the familiar ache rising, the instinct to rescue, to fix, to pour from an empty cup. But then I looked around the small bookstore, the books, the light, the quiet life I had built, and I realized I couldn't go back. Robert, I said slowly, you don't need me. You need to grow up. Please, he whispered. I'm not asking for money this time. I just want to talk, face to face. There was something in his tone I hadn't heard in years. Shame. It softened me, just enough. All right, I said. Tomorrow morning, 11 o'clock, at the cafe by the harbor. The next day, I arrived early. The sea glittered in the sunlight, calm and endless. I sat by the window, my tea steaming, my hands steady. When Robert walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked older, thinner, the arrogance drained from his face. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. For the first time, he looked like a man who had finally met consequence. He sat down quietly. You look good, he said. Healthier. I nodded. Freedom suits me. He smiled weakly. I guess I deserved that. He stared into his cup for a long time. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For the money. For taking advantage. For treating you like... He stopped, searching for the word. Like an obligation. I waited. I had imagined this moment so many times, how I'd demand explanations, unleash years of pain. But sitting across from him now, I felt none of that. Only a tired kind of peace. I forgive you, I said simply. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means I'm done carrying the weight. He nodded slowly. I understand. We talked for nearly an hour about his mistakes, my part in enabling them, about Lauren and the hollow world they'd built together. He spoke with remorse that sounded real. I thought success meant appearances, he said. I thought as long as we looked happy we were. I looked at him, my son, my reflection in male form. Robert, happiness doesn't come from what you show the world. It comes from what you stop hiding from yourself. His eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink them away. I miss Dad, he said quietly. He would have known what to do. I reached across the table, placed my hand on his. Your father would have told you the same thing I'm telling you now, that a man isn't measured by what he owns but by what he gives back. He nodded, his grip tightening. Mom, can we start over? The question hung in the air. I wanted to say yes, but I had learned that new beginnings only work when both sides are willing to change. We can try, I said. But starting over means boundaries. I won't be your rescuer anymore. If you fall, you stand up. If you fail, you learn. I'll love you, but I won't save you. He wiped his eyes and nodded. That's fair. We finished our tea in silence. Before leaving, he said, There's something else. Lauren's pregnant. The words hit me like a wave I hadn't seen coming. Pregnant? He nodded. 3 months. She hasn't told her parents yet. She's scared. I sat back, stunned. After everything, the fights, the debt, the cruelty life had decided to hand them a new beginning. Then you'd better be the kind of father who teaches by example, I said softly. He smiled through the tears. I'll try, Mom. I promise. When he left, I stayed at the cafe, staring out at the water. The sunlight shimmered like scattered coins across the surface. I thought about how easily cycles repeat, mothers rescuing sons, sons growing into men who forget, then remember too late. But maybe this time would be different. Maybe losing everything had taught him what love really costs. As the tide came in, I whispered to myself, this is where it changes. Yet deep down, a part of me knew the story wasn't over, because life always finds a way to test the lessons we think we've learned. The following weeks unfolded, like quiet chapters in a book I never expected to write. Robert called every few days, short conversations, no requests, no guilt. Each time, his voice carried a little more humility, a little less pride. It was strange hearing my son speak like a man learning how to be one. I didn't fully trust it yet, but I listened. That was enough. One morning, a letter arrived in an envelope with my name written in his handwriting. Inside was a check for $2,000 and a note that read, "For every time I said I'd pay you back and didn't. I know it's not enough, but it's a start." I held that paper for a long time, tears welling up. It wasn't the money that moved me, it was the acknowledgement. After years of silence, someone had finally said the words I'd been waiting for. "I remember what you gave." I didn't cash the check. I kept it in the same brown folder where the old documents used to be, not as proof of debt, but as proof of change. Sometimes, the smallest gesture carries more weight than an entire apology. As the months passed, autumn came to the coast. The bookstore grew busier. Tourists wandered in with cameras and sunburns, searching for souvenirs and stories. I grew used to their voices, to their curiosity, to being a woman who belonged nowhere but finally felt at home. Carol said I looked younger. Margaret said I laughed more. Maybe I did. Freedom is a kind of beauty that doesn't need mirrors. Then one afternoon, as the wind turned colder, I received another call from Robert. His voice trembled. "Mom, it's happening. The baby's coming early." My heart jumped. "Where are you?" "St. Mary's Hospital. They said it could be today." He paused. "Can you come?" For a second, every instinct in me screamed yes. But another voice, quieter, steadier, reminded me of all the nights I'd said yes at my own expense. "Does Lauren want me there?" I asked. The silence that followed was long. "She doesn't know I called," he admitted. "But I need you." I hesitated only a moment. "I'll come," I said. But not for her approval. For you and for the child. The drive back to the city felt like stepping into an old dream. Familiar streets, old buildings, memories stitched into every corner, but I wasn't the same woman returning. The city hadn't changed. I had. When I entered the hospital, Robert met me in the hallway. His face was pale, anxious, but when he saw me, something in him broke. "She's scared," he said. "They said there might be complications." His voice shook, the same way it had when he was a little boy afraid of thunderstorms. I took his hand. "She'll be all right. Breathe, Robert." Hours passed. The white walls swallowed time. Finally, a nurse appeared. "It's a girl," she said, smiling. "They're both fine." Robert exhaled like a man surfacing from deep water. Tears ran down his cheeks. "A girl," he whispered. "Mom, I have a daughter." We walked into the room. Lauren lay pale and exhausted, but when she saw me, her eyes softened. No words, just a nod. She held out the tiny bundle wrapped in white. The baby's face was pink and peaceful, her fists clenched like she was ready to hold the world. I leaned closer, and something ancient stirred inside me, the same warmth I'd felt the day Robert was born. "She's beautiful," I said softly. Lauren smiled faintly. "We named her Sophie." Sophie. The name floated between us like a small truce. Robert looked at me. "Mom, will you hold her?" I reached out carefully, the child warm and impossibly light in my arms. She blinked once, her tiny eyes opening to meet mine, and in that instant, everything that had been broken seemed to mend. Not erased, not forgotten, but understood. I felt tears sliding down my face, but this time they weren't born of pain. They were made of something new, forgiveness that didn't need permission. I whispered, "Welcome to the world, Sophie. You'll do better than we did." Robert touched my shoulder. "Mom," he said quietly, "thank you for coming." I looked at him, truly looked, and saw not the man who had used me, but the son who was finally learning how to love. "You don't need to thank me," I said. "Just do better for her than I did for you." He nodded, holding Lauren's hand, his eyes full of a promise I hoped he would keep. As I stepped out of the room, the evening light spilled through the hospital window, golden and kind. Life, I realized, has a strange way of beginning exactly where you thought it had ended. Weeks passed after Sophie's birth, and the rhythm of life began to settle into something new. Robert called every Sunday, never asking for anything, just talking sometimes about Sophie's sleepless nights, sometimes about how hard it was to balance work and fatherhood. There were no excuses, no manipulation, only honesty. It felt fragile, like a flower growing in the cracks of concrete. I didn't dare hope too much, but I listened. That, I had learned, was enough. Lauren surprisingly reached out too. One afternoon, she sent a photo of Sophie wrapped in a yellow blanket, her tiny mouth open in a yawn. The message was simple. "She looks just like you." It was the first time Lauren had ever given me a compliment without asking for something in return. I stared at the picture for a long time before replying, "She's perfect." It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a beginning. In the bookstore, I told Amelia about the call. She smiled knowingly as she wiped the counter. "You see, life has a strange way of giving back when you least expect it," she said. "But remember, Audrey, forgiveness is not an invitation to start over exactly as before. It's a new foundation, one you build carefully." Her words stayed with me like a lighthouse in fog. I visited Robert and Lauren a month later. Their apartment was small but warm, the walls covered in photos of Sophie. The smell of baby lotion filled the air, soft and innocent. Robert greeted me at the door, smiling nervously. "She's been asking about you," he said, gesturing toward Lauren. Lauren came out of the bedroom holding Sophie, her expression uncertain but open. "Hi, Audrey," she said quietly. I smiled. "You can call me Mom if you want to." She looked surprised, then nodded. "Okay, Mum." We sat together in the living room. Sophie lay between us, cooing softly. For the first time, silence wasn't a weapon. It was peace. Lauren handed me a cup of tea and said, "I was wrong about you, about a lot of things." I took the cup and smiled gently. "We were all wrong about something. What matters is what we learn from it." She nodded, her eyes misty. Robert joined us, carrying a small photo frame. Inside was a picture of me holding Sophie at the hospital. "I had this printed," he said. "I wanted it to remind us that family doesn't disappear, it just needs to learn how to start again." I felt a lump in my throat. I didn't want to cry. Not here, not in front of them, but emotion has its own rules. "Thank you," I whispered. Sophie laughed suddenly, a bright, small sound that cut through years of pain. It was as if the house itself exhaled, releasing every ghost it had carried. I realized then that forgiveness didn't erase history. It rewrote it. It turned every scar into a lesson, every wound into a doorway toward something better. As evening fell, I stood by the window watching the city lights flicker to life. Robert came up beside me. "Mom," he said softly, "do you ever regret walking away that night?" I thought for a long moment before answering. "No," I said, "because walking away was the only way any of us could find our way back." He nodded, and for once there was no argument, no guilt, just understanding. He slipped his arm around my shoulder, and for the first time in years, I let myself lean into it. The warmth was real this time, earned, not demanded. When I left that night, Lauren hugged me goodbye. It was brief but sincere. "You'll come again, right?" she asked. "Of course," I said. "But next time, you'll cook." She laughed, and for the first time I saw in her eyes something that had been missing all along: respect. The taxi ride back to the coast was quiet. I looked out the window, the city fading behind me, and thought about how strange love can be. Sometimes it suffocates you, sometimes it saves you. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it teaches you that loving yourself first doesn't mean giving up on others, it means giving them a chance to meet you halfway. As I reached my little seaside town, the ocean waited, constant and endless. I walked to the water's edge before going home, letting the wind tangle my hair. The tide whispered against the shore as if saying, "You did it." I smiled and whispered back, "Finally." But deep down, I knew one truth would always remain: the story wasn't really about them anymore. It was about me, about every woman who ever mistook sacrifice for love, about learning that saying enough isn't the end of a story, it's the start of a better one. 6 months passed since that night, when everything changed. My small apartment by the sea had become more than a home, it was a symbol of rebirth. Every morning, I opened the windows and let the salt air drift in, a daily reminder that life could still taste new. I woke up early, made coffee, and watched the waves roll in, each one washing away a piece of my old self. There was no rush, no chaos, no waiting for a phone call that would drain me. Just peace. Robert called every 2 weeks now, never missing a single one. Our talks were brief but full of meaning. "How are you feeling, Mom?" "Fine, Robert. And Sophie?" "Growing too fast. She tried to say Grandma yesterday." I could hear the smile in his voice, and it made mine appear too. Sometimes he sent photos: Sophie holding a seashell, Sophie covered in cake, Sophie sleeping in his arms. I printed each one, and kept them on a shelf above my reading chair. It was a small altar to everything that had finally healed. At the bookstore, life bloomed quietly. Amelia promoted me to full-time manager. "You've brought a warmth here that we didn't know we needed," she said. I laughed. "I just learned to live slower." She smiled knowingly. "No, Audrey. You learned to live wiser." Those words stayed with me all day. They reminded me that wisdom isn't born from victory, it's carved from pain that finally found its purpose. Every Thursday, the women's reading group gathered as usual. We talked about books, but mostly, we talked about life. Julia said she had started traveling again after years of fear. Margaret had taken up painting. And me, I told them about Sophie, about how holding her made me believe in softness again. "Do you think you'll ever move back?" Julia asked. I shook my head gently. "No. The old house belonged to who I was. This place belongs to who I've become." The days drifted like pages in a well-loved novel. Then one evening, as I was closing the shop, a familiar sound echoed through the doorway, the giggle of a child. I turned and froze. Robert stood there, holding Sophie, with Lauren beside him. The sunset spilled gold light behind them, painting the moment like something out of a dream. "Surprise," Robert said. I smiled, stunned but happy. "What are you doing here?" "Vacation," Lauren replied. "We rented a small house near the shore. We thought maybe we could spend a few days together." Her voice was gentle, hesitant, nothing like before. I felt my heart stir. "I'd like that," I said. "Very much." The next morning we walked along the beach. Sophie ran ahead, chasing the foam, her laughter mixing with the sound of the waves. Robert and I walked side by side in silence. "You were right about everything," he said suddenly. "About money, about family, about me. I used to think love meant always giving, but now I know it means respecting what's given." I looked at him and smiled. "Then maybe we both learned what love really is." Lauren caught up with us carrying seashells. She looked lighter too, her eyes no longer cold. "Sophie wants to build a sandcastle with you," she said. I bent down beside my granddaughter, showing her how to shape the wet sand. Her small hands pressed against mine, and together we built something that somehow felt sacred, a fragile monument to everything we had destroyed and rebuilt. When the sun began to set, Robert took a photo of us. "For the family album," he said. I nodded. This time I knew it wasn't for show, it was for memory, for truth. That night, as I watched them walk back toward their rental house, hand in hand, I realized something simple yet profound. Love doesn't always vanish when it's wounded. Sometimes it just waits quietly until we're ready to treat it with kindness again. And standing there on the shore, the sky painted in amber and blue, I whispered to the wind, "This time, I'm not returning to my old life. I'm simply learning how to live it right." Spring came softly to the coast, with the scent of wildflowers carried by the wind. My days had found a rhythm: morning walks, quiet hours at the bookstore, evenings filled with the sound of waves tapping against the shore. But something had changed in me. I no longer waited for the past to catch up. I no longer measured my worth through anyone's approval. My peace was no longer borrowed. It was earned. Robert and Lauren visited often that season, sometimes for a weekend, sometimes just a day. Sophie had grown into a curious little girl with her father's eyes and my stubbornness. She loved stories. Every time she came, she ran straight to the bookstore shouting, "Grandma, read!" I would pull her onto my lap, open a picture book, and watch her tiny fingers trace the illustrations like they held magic. She didn't know it, but she had become my second chance at love, the kind that gives without breaking. Lauren was different too, humble, softer, and real. One afternoon, while Sophie napped, she came to the kitchen where I was brewing tea. "Audrey," she began quietly, "I need to say something." I turned, and her eyes were wet. "I'm sorry for everything, for treating you like you owed us the world. I thought love was something you could demand. I see now it's something you earn." I placed a hand on hers. We were both learning. The important thing is that we didn't stop. That evening we all had dinner by the sea, grilled fish, warm bread, simple food that tasted of healing. Robert raised a glass of wine. "To new beginnings," he said. I smiled. "To growth," I added. Lauren clinked her glass. "And to strong women who know when to walk away." We laughed, the sound mingling with the breeze. Even the ocean seemed to applaud. Later that night, when everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone on the porch with the stars reflecting on the water. I thought of the woman I used to be, the one who lived waiting for a phone call, who believed love meant surrendering everything. I no longer pitied her. I honored her, because without her endurance, I would never have found the strength to become this version of myself, the one who knows that love can be gentle without being blind. As the moon rose, I felt something inside me settle. I realized I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. Solitude had become my teacher, my friend. It had shown me that life doesn't end when people leave. It begins when you finally stop chasing what hurts you. I closed my eyes, listening to the rhythm of the waves. Each crash against the shore sounded like a heartbeat, steady and alive. I whispered, "You did it, Audrey. You saved yourself." The wind carried my words out to sea, and for the first time, I believed them. But just as I stood to go inside, my phone buzzed. A message from Robert. "Mom, thank you for everything. I just hope one day Sophie grows up to be like you." I smiled, tears forming in my eyes. The circle was complete. The pain that once defined me had turned into legacy, and in that quiet moment under the silver sky, I knew this wasn't just my ending, it was my continuation. Because every woman who learns to choose herself writes a story that will outlive her. Summer returned with sunlight that shimmered like forgiveness. The town was livelier now, filled with laughter, seagulls, and tourists wandering along the shore. My bookstore bloomed with visitors, locals, travelers, and friends who had become family. Amelia said I had become part of the town's rhythm, like the tide that always came back no matter how far it drifted. Maybe she was right. I wasn't running anymore. I was home. Robert continued to call every Sunday. Sometimes Sophie would grab the phone and shout, "Grandma, ocean!" and I would turn the camera toward the water so she could watch the waves sparkle. "It's magic," she'd say, clapping her little hands. In those moments I felt something I hadn't in years, pure, uncomplicated joy. The kind that doesn't ask, doesn't take, just is. One afternoon, Robert visited alone. He had driven for 6 hours just to see me. When I opened the door, he looked older but peaceful, the sharp edges of pride worn away. We sat on the porch drinking lemonade while the horizon melted into gold. "You were right," he said after a long silence. "About everything. About money. About family. About me. I thought you walking away destroyed us, but it saved us." I looked at him, my heart swelling with quiet pride. "You saved yourself, Robert. I just stopped standing in your way." He laughed softly. "You know, Sophie told her teacher that her grandma is brave." I smiled. "Brave? I was just tired of being sad." He shook his head. "No, Mom, it takes courage to choose peace over guilt." When he left that evening, I watched his car disappear down the winding road. I didn't feel the ache of separation anymore. It was replaced by a deep calm, the knowledge that we were finally two adults meeting halfway, not a mother carrying her son. The bond was still there, but now it was built on respect, not expectation. As night fell, I lit a candle by the window. The flame danced gently in the breeze, and I thought of every woman who had ever felt invisible, every mother who had given until there was nothing left. I wanted to tell them what I had learned, that love isn't measured by how much you sacrifice, but by how much of yourself you keep. Because without self-respect, even love loses its meaning. The bookstore had become more than a place of work. It was my sanctuary. People came not only for books, but for conversation, advice, a kind word. "You always seem so calm," one woman said. "What's your secret?" I smiled, knowing that peace isn't given, it's protected. She nodded, as if those words carried more weight than they looked. In the evenings, I walked along the beach, collecting shells for Sophie. Each one was different, cracked, imperfect, but still beautiful. I placed them in a jar labeled "For Tomorrow." It reminded me that no matter how broken the past, something precious always remains. That night, as I prepared for bed, the phone buzzed again. A message from Lauren. "Audrey, thank you for teaching me what family really means. We're bringing Sophie next month for her birthday. She wants to spend it with you." I smiled through tears. The woman who once called me by my first name now spoke to me with love. I turned off the lights, letting the moonlight spill across the room. Tomorrow would bring more stories, more laughter, more of the quiet, gentle life I had built. I didn't need anything grand anymore. I had everything that mattered. Peace, purpose, and people who had finally learned the difference between love and dependence. As I drifted to sleep, the sound of the sea filled the silence. Each wave whispered the same truth over and over. It's never too late to begin again, and never too late to be free. Sophie's third birthday arrived with laughter, sunlight, and the smell of vanilla cake drifting through the coastal air. Robert and Lauren had come the night before, bringing balloons, presents, and that same warmth that once felt impossible. The small house filled with life again, tiny footsteps, giggles, and soft chatter blending with the sound of waves outside. Watching them, I realized something beautiful. Time doesn't erase the past, but it softens its edges until forgiveness fits naturally in your hands. Sophie ran to me with frosting on her face, holding a shell she had found that morning. "Grandma, this one is shaped like a heart. she said, placing it in my palm. I looked at the imperfect, chipped shell and smiled. It's perfect, just like you, she beamed, and in her eyes I saw the reflection of everything I had fought for: the right to love without being erased, to give without disappearing. After lunch, Lauren helped me clean the table while Robert played with Sophie outside. She turned to me, her expression soft. I don't know how you forgave us, she said quietly. I don't think I could have. I placed the dish down, my voice calm. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what they did. It's about remembering who you are. She nodded slowly. You've changed all of us, Audrey, especially Robert. I smiled faintly. He just needed to remember the boy he used to be. Later, we all walked along the beach together. Robert carried Sophie on his shoulders. Lauren held his hand, and I walked beside them, letting the sea breeze wrap around us like a promise. The tide rolled gently, whispering the same rhythm as my heart beat steady, grateful, alive. Robert turned toward me. Mom, he said, I know I've said thank you before, but it never feels enough. I shook my head. You don't have to thank me. Just keep being the father you promised to be. He smiled. I will. For her, and for you. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, Sophie pointed at the glowing sky. Grandma, look, the ocean's on fire. I laughed. That's just the sunset, sweetheart. It means the day is saying goodbye. She thought for a moment, then whispered, Then the ocean must love the sky very much. Her words hung in the air, innocent but profound. Children always seem to understand the things adults spend a lifetime trying to learn. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the moon paint silver paths across the water. I thought of the journey that had brought me here, the pain, the silence, the moment I walked away from that restaurant with my heart in pieces. I had lost everything that night, but I had also gained something far more precious, myself. The woman who once lived in shadows had learned to stand in her own light. I whispered into the breeze, You did it, Audrey. You broke the cycle. The waves answered softly, as if agreeing. In that quiet, I realized my story wasn't just about survival, it was about transformation. It was proof that love without boundaries isn't love at all, and that strength sometimes begins the moment you stop explaining your pain. Tomorrow, Sophie would wake up early and ask for pancakes. Robert would make coffee, Lauren would hum as she set the table, and I would stand by the window watching the sunlight fill our small kitchen. Life wouldn't be perfect, but it would be honest. And that was enough. As the night deepened, I looked once more at the sea. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, the woman I used to be still walked quiet, wounded, waiting to be seen. I wanted to tell her something. I wanted to say, You were never weak for loving too much, only brave for finally choosing yourself. And in that moment, under the gentle hum of the tide, I knew that I had not only survived the storm, I had become the calm after it. Autumn returned quietly, wrapping the coast in golden light and the faint scent of salt and wood smoke. My days moved with ease now, early mornings by the sea, long afternoons at the bookstore, evenings spent writing small thoughts in a worn leather journal. I no longer wrote about pain. I wrote about peace, about rediscovery, about what it means to build a life from the ruins of one you once thought would last forever. Every word felt like a small celebration of freedom. Robert and Lauren still visited once a month, bringing Sophie, who now ran straight into my arms shouting, Grandma, story time, before anyone could take off their shoes. Watching her grow reminded me that love, when tended with patience, blooms again no matter how many winters it survives. She loved the ocean, the shells, and the bookstore. One afternoon, she stood in front of the shop window, tracing her reflection on the glass. Grandma, she asked, when I grow up, can I have a place like this too? I smiled. Of course, as long as it's filled with stories you love. She thought for a moment, then nodded seriously. Then I want to fill it with stories about brave people like you. That evening, when they left for their hotel, I sat on the porch watching the sky turn violet. The world was so still, it almost felt like it was holding its breath. I thought about all the times I had been afraid of silence, of solitude, of endings. Now I knew silence could be sacred, solitude could be strength, and endings were just the beginning of truth. A few weeks later, Amelia announced she was retiring. You should take over the store, she said. I blinked, speechless. Me? She smiled. Who else? You've given this place its heart again. My throat tightened. I don't know if I'm ready. You are, she said simply, and she was right. I bought the store 2 months later, renaming it The Second Chapter. The sign outside was small but beautiful hand-painted letters curved like waves. Every time I unlocked the door, I felt a quiet pride settle inside me. I had once thought my story was over. Now I was the one turning the pages. Sometimes, visitors came in and asked about the name. "Why the second chapter?" they'd say. I would smile and answer, "Because every story deserves another chance." Most would nod politely and move on. But every now and then, someone would pause, really listen, and I'd see it in their eyes they understood. Maybe they too were living their second chapter. One late afternoon as I was closing up, Robert called. His voice carried a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Mom, Sophie's school invited parents and grandparents for storytelling day. Would you come?" I laughed softly. "You really want me to read in front of a classroom full of children?" "Yes," he said, "because you're the best storyteller I know." His words warmed me from the inside out. "All right," I said. "Tell Sophie I'll bring her favorite book." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how far we had come from broken dinners and cold silences to laughter and invitations. Healing, I realized, doesn't happen in one moment. It happens slowly, in ordinary gestures, in the space between one phone call and the next, in every small choice to forgive without surrendering. The next day, as I watched the dawn rise over the ocean, I whispered the same promise I had made to myself years ago. Never again would I shrink to make someone else comfortable. Never again would I confuse love with obligation. And never again would I forget that dignity is not something others give, it's something you protect. The waves rolled in softly, the sun glowing like gold on the water. I breathed deeply, feeling gratitude settle into my bones. My life was simple now, but it was full of meaning, of calm, of second chances. I finally understood that peace isn't found at the end of a journey. It's built in every step you take toward yourself. And as the morning light spilled across the sea, I smiled. The story of Audrey Rivers wasn't one of loss. It was one of rebirth. And maybe, just maybe, that's what real love looks like. Not saving others at the cost of yourself, but saving yourself so that love can finally mean freedom. The day of Sophie's storytelling event arrived bright and warm, the kind of morning that feels like a promise kept. I wore a simple blue dress, tied my hair back, and carried her favorite book, The Ocean's Whisper. When I entered the classroom, Sophie's eyes lit up. "Grandma," she shouted, running to hug my legs. The other children watched, curious, and for a brief second, I felt a familiar flutter of nervousness. But then Sophie took my hand and led me to the front like I belonged there, and I did. I began to read, my voice steady, the rhythm of the story rolling like gentle waves. The children leaned in, their small faces glowing with wonder. The tale was about a woman who once feared the sea but learned to listen to its song instead of fighting its tide. When I finished, Sophie clapped first, then the whole room followed. One of the teachers smiled. "That was beautiful, Mrs. Rivers." I nodded softly. "It's based on a true story." After class, Robert waited by the door, pride written all over his face. "You were amazing," he said. "You have no idea how much Sophie talks about you. Her teacher said she wrote about you in her journal." I laughed. "Oh, what did she write?" He took out a folded paper from his pocket. On it, in a child's uneven handwriting, were the words, "My grandma listens to the ocean because it tells her secrets about being brave." I pressed my hand against my chest, my heart aching in the sweetest way. "She's going to grow up fearless," I said. Robert smiled. "Just like you." We walked outside, the air smelling of chalk and sunshine. Lauren was waiting by the car, waving. "We're going to have lunch by the pier," she said. "You're coming, right?" For a moment, I hesitated, remembering all the years when being invited had meant being used. But this time, the invitation wasn't a demand, it was genuine. "Of course," I said. At the pier we ate fish and chips, Sophie feeding crumbs to the seagulls. Robert leaned back in his chair, laughing. Lauren reached across the table, touching my hand. "I still don't know how you do it," she said softly. "After everything that happened, you don't carry bitterness." I looked at her, the sea wind moving my hair. Because bitterness is just pain that forgot it had a purpose. I decided mine would grow into something better. She nodded slowly, her eyes bright. "You really are the strongest woman I know." When the meal was over, we walked along the pier. Sophie climbed onto the railing, arms spread wide. "Look, Grandma, I'm flying," she said, her laughter echoing through the air. I held her hand lightly, not to stop her, but to keep her safe. That's what love had become for me, not control, not sacrifice, but steady hands and open space. As the sun dipped lower, painting everything in amber, Robert turned to me. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked quietly. I smiled faintly. "Sometimes, but not with anger anymore. It was the night I finally learned that love without respect isn't love at all. It was painful, but necessary." He nodded. "I think it was the night we all grew up." We stood there for a while, watching the horizon blur into gold and silver. The world felt still, suspended between past and possibility. Sophie tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma, will you tell me the ocean story again tonight?" I knelt down, brushing her hair from her face. "Every time you need to remember how strong you are," I said. That night, after they dropped me home, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, listening to the tide whispering against the rocks. The stars were scattered like tiny lanterns across the sky. I thought about everything, the tears, the silence, the rediscovery, and realized I wouldn't change a single part of it. Every wound had taught me how to breathe again. Every goodbye had shaped the woman I was now. Before going to bed, I opened my journal and wrote one final line. "Freedom isn't about leaving. It's about never needing permission to stay true to yourself." I closed the book, placed it on the nightstand, and smiled. Outside, the waves kept singing the same melody they had sung since the beginning. Steady, eternal, forgiving. And in that sound, I finally heard it clearly. The echo of a life rebuilt. One choice, one boundary, one heartbeat at a time.